Welcome to the CFL Three Down Breakdown. We're back. It's season premiere time. It's a new CFL season, 2018 edition, and we're going to break it down all season long with my friend Andrew McGinnis. We'll be on every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, breaking down the Canadian Football League. The season begins next Thursday, June 14th. We'll be doing weekly game breakdowns of the entire card throughout the season. For our season premiere edition today, however, we're going to be doing a season preview show. We're going to be looking at all 9 teams, just brief little summations about what we expect from each team, and we're going to go just basically east to west across the CFL landscape and look at the teams team by team and what our expectations are. Bet on, bet against. Is there any value, win totals, or futures? We'll get to all that throughout this show. Let's get right to it because we don't have any time to waste. We got to get through all 9 teams. We're going to go east to west. We're going to start with the furthest team east, and this is by far the team we had the most enjoyment, Andrew and I, making fun of, laughing at, just kicking the living tar out of last season. That's the Montreal Alouettes, who had just an absolute shit show of a season, a complete and utter disaster from the management right on down to the product on the field. 3-15 straight up for the Montreal Alouettes last season, 4-14 against the spread, and that goes to show you how bad they are. When you are a 3-15 football team, you're supposed to have some kind of residual value in the point spread because you're so bad and you're priced like it. They were so bad that the betting markets and the point spread couldn't catch up to how bad they were. They only covered 4 point spreads last season, this Montreal Alouettes team. And really, from the bottom to up, it was a disaster. As I said, you start with Jacques Chapdelaine, who began the year as the head coach, who was fired wrongfully, in my opinion, way too soon. What did he get fired for? For not having talent to coach? That's basically it. And that's exactly what happened there. Cavis Reed, the GM, slides down, becomes the interim head coach, and things get even worse, not better. Oh, when that happens, because this guy is a complete buffoon, he has ruined this roster. He has completely destroyed it as far as I'm concerned, and the players did not respond to him as the interim coach one iota. Now he's gambling on former Green Bay Packers head coach and Texas A&M head coach, stints in the NFL and college football for Mike Sherman as the new head coach here in the Montreal Alouettes. We know what this is like. Yeah, it's a guy that's had success in the NFL before, back when Brett Favre was with the Packers. Yeah, he did an okay job at A&M. They had some decent runs there. But now we're talking about a guy that's got to learn the Canadian game. It's a totally different learning curve, and this is not going to be an easy transition here for the Montreal Alouettes. The same issues about this team are rearing their ugly head again already in preseason and training camp. Lack of depth, defensive concerns, both up front and in the secondary. Who the hell is the quarterback going to be? We've had Josh Nicewander, Tanner Marsh, Troy Smith, Rakeem Cato, Kevin Glenn, and a carousel of schmucks, really, at the quarterback spot over the years for the Montreal Alouettes. Who's going to be the quarterback? It looks like it's going to be Drew Willie or Matt Schultz based on training camp. One of those two guys will get the job, and I sure don't trust in either one. Schultz does have a little bit more upside. Young guy, he's got a decent arm, but I got to see more of him as a starter. Drew Willie, I've seen enough. I'm not sure I trust him to be a number one guy anymore at this level. So for me, Montreal is a bet against until they show me something positive, and really until Cavis Reed gets the hell out of there, because I think that's the problem to begin with. Question marks all around for me with this team. Andrew, your thoughts? Montreal Alouettes here in 2018.
Yeah, Ian, it's absolutely great to be back with you here on the CFL Through Down Breakdown. It's a brand new season. And yeah, talking about this Montreal Alouettes team, you mentioned we talked last year about how much of a disgrace they were, what they could really do for us on a weekly basis, even just not even being able to cover spreads. Like you mentioned, 4-14 against the spread. Absolutely ridiculous. But more importantly, they averaged 32.2 points against. So not only were they a team that couldn't put points on the board too much, but they were a team that just got walked all over every single night in and night out. And looking at the win totals right now, they look sitting at 5.5, and it's actually crunched more towards the over in that number. But look, I'm going to go towards the under 5.5 in this one again for their season win totals. I think it's going to be one of those seasons where if you're a team that struggled so bad in the previous season, Ian, in my eyes, looking at this roster that we have, it's been so mixed up from the head coaching position, from the quarterback position, from the general management position. You got to take things a step back and kind of have that, trust the process, as they would say in the Philadelphia 76ers in basketball. And, that's why when you mentioned that they should give Schultz an opportunity at quarterback, I believe they should. I don't think Drew Willie is a quarterback that can start back this franchise into a good, successful team like Anthony Calvillo had for so many years. And this guy Drew Willie, he gets banged up. He throws ints. He can't escape the pocket too well. And this is a team that's really trying to make an identity for themselves and trying to really recoup from last season. So as far as that goes for me, I'm looking at under 5.5 wins at plus 110 at the plus price for this Montreal Alouettes team.
Hard to argue with that. I mean, I got to see it before I believe it with this Montreal team, and I don't want to make too much of one preseason game, and I always say that. But like I say, I didn't see any. The starters didn't play well, and the backups were even worse, which tells me that if there's injuries to starters, it could even get absolutely worse for this team. I mean, their lack of quality depth at all positions, the skill position talent, the quarterback position, the secondary. They just re-signed Chip Cox, for crying out loud, to a 1-year contract. You're relying on 36-year-old, mid-30s, high 30s Chip Cox to be a good defender for you and lead this team defensively. He's not Chip Cox of 10 years ago when he was one of the better players in the league on the defensive side of the football. It's just not the case anymore. So a lot of question marks with this team. Definitely a more of a bet against approach, I think, for Andrew and I, both of us, with this team until proven otherwise. Next up, we got the Ottawa Redblacks as we continue East Division, 8-9 straight up last year, 12-6 against the spread. They've narrowly dodged a big bullet last week. Trevor Harris got injured in their first preseason game. Looks like he's going to be okay. Looks like he's still on pace to play in the season opener for them, which comes against Saskatchewan in week 1. That's a positive for them. But the Ottawa Redblacks are a team that's also looking for a little bit more stability. Obviously, they're not in as bad shape as Montreal, but when you look at the Ottawa Redblacks, Trevor Harris, can he stay healthy? I'm still convinced this guy's a pretty good quarterback, has the potential to be if he can stay on the football field, but that's certainly been a growing issue and a growing problem with him in the last couple of seasons. Certainly last year that was on display. They're going to hope to have a guy that was supposed to be a big cog for them, William Powell at running back, injured most of last season. He's going to hope to be healthy this year. Obviously, you're going to rely on in terms of catching the football. Actually, a very good receiving core. I like it quite a bit. Deontay Spencer. You've got your stalwarts, Greg Ellingson and Brad Sinopoli back again. Julian Fioli-Godino from Winnipeg is a pretty decent little slot receiver. So I think that's a good addition for them. Their offensive line, I think, has also taken a step forward this season. I like John Gott being there he played for BC way back in the day. That's a big time addition here to this team. How about Kyrie Zebair, the former Alouette linebacker, one of the few quality defenders last year on that team, now an Ottawa Redblack this season. So they've made some decent moves. I think it really hinges on Harris. I mean, if he's healthy, Ottawa can be right in the mix here to win this division, not just make the playoffs, maybe win this division. But without him, things could be much different in terms of this team and their season hopes. Really do hinge on the fact that the potential of Trevor Harris to stay healthy this season. Andrew, your take on the Ottawa Redblacks this season?
Yeah, Ian, I really feel like in any league, no matter what sport it is that you're talking about, there always seems to be one injury like that has to come out of a preseason game. It just has to happen. And it's such a shame because he barely even played too many minutes. But like you mentioned, I do believe that Trevor Harris is kind of the backbone to this team. But, let's not forget about what we really see out of this team from the depth wise. When this team is on, they are on. We talked about William Powell. This is a guy that coming into this season, a lot of expectations for him as the running back. We really do have to see him kind of explode. He's one of those guys that, he's not one of those guys that's going to run for 1 or 2 yards. When he does explode, he will average, 6-7 yards per carry. Talk about Spencer. Talk about Ellingson. I've always been a huge fan of the Ellingson and Brad Sinopoli, who just re-signed in this offseason. Kind of a 1-2 punch. Sinopoli, more of that kind of a wideout kind of guy, and Greg Ellingson, more of that Gronkowski kind of player where you find him in the end zone. He's just such a tall guy. He can get up there and grab some TDs for you. So I think as far as this Redblacks go, I think, they can really kind of make this season whatever they want it to be if they meet their maximum potential. Like I mentioned, I'll talk about this throughout the show and, throughout these weeks, but I do really think, Ian, once again this year, this East is going to be a lot farther, a lot below this West division, and it's going to be a lot weaker. So looking at these teams, and as we talk about these, I think the Redblacks will stack up pretty well in this East division. But I think as far as the standings going overall, this West division is going to be a little bit too powerful. If you look at the season standings from last year, only one team, the Toronto Argonauts, actually were 500 in the East division. So it just goes to show how dominant the West division was. Looking at for the Ottawa Redblacks, their season win total is set at 8.5 right now, Ian. And I'm not sure how you feel about that, but with the depth at the wide receiver core that we have, and with a healthy Trevor Harris, I do see them, being in the mix with the Ticats, with the Argonauts. But 8.5 is an interesting number, and I'm not going to make a pick on that. But 8.5 is one of those numbers where if I was getting kind of a 7.5 and 8, I'd look towards it. But I'm not going to be too high on this Ottawa team to start the season.
I'm leaning over. I want to give out a lean here, but it would be over 8.5 for me. But again, I just don't know if Trevor's going to play 18 games this season, and that's a big sticking point with me in terms of that win total. I think there's a huge drop off when you go back after Trevor Harris here on this Ottawa Redblacks team, and that's going to be a little bit of an issue for them if he gets hurt. So, and because these had, it seems year after year, some kind of injury bug. That's going to keep me off the over 8.5. So I'm going to lean in that direction, but it's not something I'm probably going to pull the trigger on prior to the season. You mentioned the dynamic East versus West, and I agree that the West is much deeper. Like 1 through 5 in the West are all very good football teams, I think, this season, or at least have the potential to be. Whereas in the East, I'm not so sure. But as we saw last year with Toronto winning the Grey Cup, one of these East teams gets hot at playoff time, and they can ride it to a championship. And so you cannot discount, even though I agree in theory, the West top to bottom is better than the East. You can't discount the East team's ability to maybe get hot at playoff time and go to a Grey Cup and win it, like Toronto did last year.
And from a betting perspective,
yep,
as well. The Toronto Argonauts were +7 underdogs in the Grey Cup against the Stampeders team, end up winning outright. It goes to show the disrespect that East Division does get. And, to be honest as well, Ian, you look at the start of this, the first kind of like several weeks you see in the CFL season, our job, I'll speak for myself, but between me and you here on the CFL 3-Down Breakdown is to find, those tweaks in the lines that we're getting and to try and prove Vegas wrong in some of these really weird lines that we will get. So that's going to be our job, to try and find those underdog lines or those favorite lines that are way, way off.
Yeah, which was pretty much Montreal every single week last year. As we continue here, the Toronto Argonauts in the East Division, we stay in the East. The defending Grey Cup champs, 9-9 straight up, 8-10 against the spread last year. But they played their best football when it counted in the month of November. And if you can play your best football in the month of November in the CFL, you're going to be holding a trophy over your head. And that's exactly what happened with the Toronto Argonauts last year. Ricky Ray, Mark Trestman, and this offense melding like a hand in a glove here. It was a perfect fit, and he had a fantastic season. He's back again for another year. They do have some quarterback depth. I like Dakota Prukop. I like Noah Picton's been good in preseason. James Franklin's been huge to get him from the Edmonton Eskimos. So if Ricky Ray goes down, this is an Argos team that is not completely done. They have got a quarterback or two even that could be able to step in there and play at a decent level if anything happens to Ricky Ray. And of course, at this stage of Ricky Ray's career, you've always got to be concerned about injuries with him now as he's approaching 40 years old. Defensively, Sean Lemon, Cleon Lang operating that defensive front that can get pressure on opposing quarterbacks that can stop the run. They're back this year for the Argos, so I think that D front should be good. There's a little bit of changes at the in the secondary. TJ Heath, Cassius Vaughn comes over from the Ticats. So secondary could be the little bit of a weak point for the Argos defensively. I think offensively they're going to be fine. I love James Wilder Jr. I think he's going to be great in the running back spot. Wide receiver wise, Armani Edwards stepped up, played well. I think Brian Timms is going to be a guy that's going to be able to come in and play pretty well for this team. S.J. Green, the veteran, showed he's still got some gas left in his tank. So Toronto's going to be good offensively, good up front at getting pressure. It's going to be that secondary. Can they hold up? But lots to like with Toronto. I think there's going to be some regression. It's going to be tough to repeat, but they proved last year. They stunned me. I thought it would take 2-3 years for Toronto to get this to a point where they could contend. And in year one under Mark Trestman, after just a complete disaster under the previous regime, it was just, and all of a sudden they turned them in 1 year into Grey Cup champs. An incredible job by Jim Pop, the GM, Mark Trestman, the coach, and the team for getting that done last year. Difficult to repeat, but obviously this is a team that should still be a pretty big force and a pretty big part of the battle for first in the East Division this year. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the Boatmen as they try to repeat as champs?
Yeah, this Toronto Argonauts team, their whole season is going to be about getting stops, just getting stops. Their defense is going to have to be becoming huge, especially when they're playing those top tier teams in the CFL standings, heading over out west, playing those teams. They know they have the offense, and they know what they're capable of doing. I mean, Ian, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this. I know it's on a sports discussion show, it's a sports betting show, but we have to mention James Wilder Jr., the rookie, 6'2", 235 pounds. Running back, 872 rushing yards, 5 TDs on 122 carries. CFL high, 7.1 yards per carry. Not to mention catching 51 passes for 533 yards. And he almost did not play this year. I mean, this is one guy that I've been pretty passionate about. I've been following quite a bit throughout the offseason. I mean, he was very, very close to taking a year off and not playing until finally this Argonauts team decided to pay that man a little bit more money. This guy has, I believe it was 4 or 5 or 6 kids at home. You know, he wanted to train to try and get into the NFL. Toronto Argonauts would not let him do that, and they finally paid that man. So I believe he will have an extraordinary season. I mean, you've got a guy like that that's almost leading you as far as rushing goes and receiving on a nightly basis. Then you've got guys like Edwards. You know, you've got guys like Posey. You've got guys like S.J. Green, who's an absolute veteran in this league. I mean, you want to talk about fantasy as well. DraftKings, FanDuel, S.J. Green will be up there for a numerous amount of catches every single night in and out. And as far as Ricky Ray goes, I think the CFL, it's one of those leagues where you actually, you know, I'm not sure about how old he is, if this theory works, but I mean, the more you settle in as a quarterback, the better you get, and the older you get, it's almost the better you are. And I think that Ricky Ray, coming off that performance from the Grey Cup, a lot of people would have just packed it in and left on a good note. But no, this man, Ricky Ray, is ready to lead his Toronto team back to the top of the standings. I think he will be up there once more this year. I'm going to look over 8.5 wins. I believe it's a plus price here, or over 9.5 at plus 110. I do think they will be a very strong team in the East this year.
Pains me as a Ticats fan to say it, but I agree. I like over 9.5 wins here with Toronto. Mark Trestman, all he did in Montreal was win double-digit games during the regular season. I know he didn't in Toronto last year. They only got to 9 wins, but that was year one with a completely new coaching staff, new systems on both sides of the football, and that team still got to 9-9, went on a run in the playoffs and won the Grey Cup. Got to think they can get to 10 wins or more this season. And like I said, even if Ricky Ray gets injured, I think they can get to 10-plus wins because they have got James Franklin in their back pocket. This is a guy that can play here in the CFL. Hell, even McLeod Bethel Thompson, for crying out loud. Mark Trestman's making this guy look good in the preseason last week. That's unbelievable. That guy was a terrible disaster of a quarterback in the NFL preseason for years, and here he is playing good in the preseason for Trestman. Trestman's a quarterback whisperer in this league. That's all there is to it. I think Toronto can get to 10-plus wins here this season, so I like over 9.5 wins as well. Hamilton Ticats, speaking of my hometown team, season ticket holder, as you all know, that I am of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Obviously, the Johnny Manziel stuff's getting the talk. I'm not going to really talk about it too much because he's not going to start people. He's not going to start week one. It's Jeremiah Masoli that's going to be in there in week one. I mean, Johnny Manziel's going to need time before he gets that first opportunity. This is a team that could go either way for me this year. Was last year's success with June Jones taking over, because when June Jones took over, this was a completely different football team. They went on that late season run. They played great. Jeremiah went in at quarterback after Kalaros was benched. They got hot. Defense started to play better. Was that a product of them just perking up because the coach got fired and Ken Austin and the new coach comes aboard? It gets everybody's attention, or is there something sustainable, some staying power to that late season success last year? I'm not sure. I think it could be. Maybe it's not. We're not so sure just yet, so I'm not personally sure yet. What I do know, though, is that they should be more comfortable in this offense. Terrence Tolliver, Luke Tasker, it's a good receiving core. Masoli was very good in the regular season. I know Masoli was awful last week in the preseason, but this is preseason. I need to see him be awful in the regular season under this coach before I go crazy. On defense, this team should be improved in that side of the ball. They were much better after June Jones took over defensively. I think the upside is there for Hamilton, but I want to see if that was just a coach gets fired blip, uptick in performance, or can they bring that again here this season? I like that Orlando Steinauer, by the way, is back in this coaching staff again, assistant head coach. That guy's good. Hamilton was very good when he was there before. Orlando Steinauer is a big deal that he's back on this coaching staff. So I think it could go either way for me. They're a wait and see approach kind of team for me, Hamilton, going into the season. Andrew, your thoughts on my beloved Ticats?
Yeah, Ian, that last year being our first year with the show and having you be a Ticats fan and a Hamilton native, it was definitely interesting for us to look at things from a point spread perspective and just an overall win perspective. They had an up and down season, but I'm not sure exactly your thoughts about June Jones, but I like his perspective. I think he's a very calm person. I think he comes in with a plan and he's not in a rush, and that's the best thing about him. I think slowly but surely this team will build. And again, just like the Toronto Argonauts are, just like the Ottawa Redblacks are, I think this team, this Hamilton team, the biggest focus with them will be their defense, getting stops, keeping teams to a low score. I mean, I think that was kind of a problem for them last year as well. You look at it, they allowed 30 points per game. I mean, one thing, they were averaging 24 points per game as well, but you still want to cut that margin down a little bit if you're going to be a successful team. I do think that Johnny Manziel, Jeremiah Masoli together, Brandon Banks, I think that together, collectively, this lineup can produce and can be in the battle, in the mix with the Toronto Argonauts at the end of the CFL season. And I just want to. I think it's kind of. I think we have to talk about real quick, Ian. It's news that a lot of Americans are going to be wondering about, and wants to talk about. I think as far as this Johnny Manziel situation goes, the way I see it, first of all, you got to feel bad for Masoli because June Jones has been recruiting Johnny Manziel since he was his A&M days. I mean, he's been following him for a very long time. And, Masoli has that message given to him by Jones. He knows, he said, that position is yours up until the Grey Cup as long as you don't give me a reason for it not to be. But we all can't sit here, Ian, and say that we don't have Manziel just lurking around the corner, just lurking around Masoli's shoulder saying, hey, the second you mess up, I'm right there to come back out. And, if he continues to play well in the preseason action as this Saturday he plays in Montreal. We saw him pass 9 for 12 with very easy passes. He scrambled a few times very successfully, and that was his very first CFL game where he didn't seem to know too much and was confused by a few things. So, I do think this Hamilton team could be very successful. Their run game is very strong. Brandon Banks, a very successful runner, punt returner as well. And I do think the defense will be the biggest thing for this Hamilton team. But as far as the 9.5 goes, Ian, I think you can probably catch a better line live in this middle of the season. But at 9.5, I'm going to make that a no play. I'm leaning over on that, but as for now, I'm going to make that a no play.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those I want to see how things start. Let's see how Masoli, can he settle in, play well, even with the Manziel distraction around him? That's a big thing. That's an external thing. I want to see it as the season progresses. We've got to hurry it along here. West Division now. We go to the West. Winnipeg Blue Bombers. How about a turnaround season for them? Made the playoffs. Great turnaround year. 12-6 straight up. 13-5 against the spread. The single best point spread team in the CFL last season, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I think they got a chance to be every bit as good this year. I really do. I mean, I was not convinced about Matt Nichols going into last year as a number one quarterback. Boy, he proved me wrong. He had a great season. They got targets to throw the football to. You've got probably, I would say, one of the best, if not the best, running back in the CFL, and Andrew Harris, who had a tremendous season, both running it and catching it. And this defense, I think, is going to be better. I think they're going to be better up front, getting pressure. This is a good secondary. The one issue the secondary had last year, I want to see them improve in. They forced a ton of turnovers. They were ball hawks, but they gave up yards against the pass. And Mike O'Shea in training camp has voiced, we've got to find other ways to stop opposing offenses than just turning them over. We've got to get off the field on second down. We've got to play good red zone defense, force field goals instead of allowing touchdowns. They've made an emphasis. We can't always rely on forcing turnovers all the time. We've got to improve our situational defense. They've got the talent to do it. You got to love Mo Leggett and Chris Randall, these two secondary cornerbacks here for Winnipeg. They're fantastic. Sky's the limit here for Winnipeg. I think they're pushing Calgary in this division, Edmonton, some of the other teams that we think of as the perennial contenders in this division. Lots to like in the peg. I think they're on the way up as they showed last year. Andrew, what do you think about the Bombers? Crazy fan base in Winnipeg. They should have something to be excited about, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, this Winnipeg team that finished 12-6 on the season, they're one of those teams that finished actually top of the league at 13-5 against the spread, 30 points for, 27 points against. They're a team that, we haven't really talked too much about, betting trends and stuff like that, but they're a team, once again, that I will be looking to bet over the total more often than not this season, Ian. And again, it is with the star power and it is with the depth that they have. A lot of people wonder the differences between the CFL, NFL, what really makes up a CFL roster. Well, I do think, as much as running back position is so important in NFL, when you've got a guy like Andrew Harris that is one of the all-stars in your team, one guy you can consistently rely on, then you've got guys like, Clarence Stenmark, Aldarius Bowman. I might have mispronounced that. I apologize, but Bowman having an excellent first game after playing his former team, Edmonton Eskimos, this past weekend in the preseason. This is going to be an absolute stacked team with Denmark. Of course, Weston Dressler re-signs in the offseason with this Winnipeg team. I think they're pretty stacked. And like you mentioned, they have to take care of the ball. That's the biggest thing. This team has constantly been a fourth quarter team that just is fighting back and fighting back. I don't remember how many times last year, Ian, this team was down in games they should not have been down on. And I think that's the biggest thing they have to adjust coming into this season. I'm not sure if you noticed that as well, but the consistency has to be there for them as well. And you mentioned that a few moments ago about taking care of the ball, less turnovers. We need to see the Matt Nichols that he wants himself to be. He needs to be the leader of this team. He needs to limit his INTs and take care of the ball. And if they do that, they will be successful. I do think they will be another top team in this West team. And looking down here at the sheet, I believe we're looking at a 8.5 to 9, Ian. It's kind of cut off on my page here. I'm not sure what you're seeing, but I do think they will end up.
11.5. Yep.
Oh, 11.5. Yeah. Like I do think they'll be at the top of the standings again. But again, like that number is pretty high. So looking at this Winnipeg team, I'll have to wait and see. But as far as this team goes, my recommendation is an over team on this team.
Yep, definitely 11.5, no bargain. But yeah, I mean, I'm very high on them for sure. Next up, we've got Saskatchewan Roughriders. This is an interesting team. When we look at last year, Saskatchewan 10-8 straight up, 10-8 against the spread. They're going to hope they've found their quarterback in Zach Collaros. And you know my issues with him. It's the same issues I have with Ricky Ray. It's the same issues that now we're starting to have with Trevor Harris, as we've mentioned. Durability. Can you stay on the field and play for 18 games during the regular season? That's been Zach Collaros' issue the last few years, which is why Hamilton cut him loose and went in another direction. It was just, an injury after another for him. But we know that the skill set's there. Throwing the football, that is. I need to see that Zach Collaros has that mental bugaboo past him of being scared to run with the football, because that's what made Zach Collaros the quarterback he was in college and early in his CFL's early success in the CFL. His ability to be a dual threat and scramble when the pocket collapsed and when receivers were covered down the field. He didn't do that anymore. He's got to rediscover that. Hopefully in Saskatchewan he finds that ability to be that kind of guy. I think the defense, which actually took steps forward last year, I think they're going to be even better. Again, you got Chris Jones as your head coach. He's a defensive guy first and foremost. I think you're going to see them play a better defense. The Zach Collaros thing's interesting because I think he's going to try to run a little bit. He's hinted at it, but I've got to see it before I believe it. I think this is a team, though, that, in terms of their offensive skill set, you're going to have obviously the Duron Carter situation. He's going to play offense and defense both this season, or at least attempt to play cornerback, play wide receiver. Should be an interesting dynamic there as well for the Saskatchewan team. Very interesting team. Again, this is with quarterbacks, you're just not sure that they can stay on the field for the full season. It's hard for me to bet a preseason over-under win total or a future. So for me, it's going to wait and see. I think from a totals perspective, this could be more of an under team this season, though, because again, Collaros didn't run up the score and put up points in bunches in Hamilton these last couple seasons. So I'm going to have to see it before I believe it. So under would be this team might be trending totals wise this season. Andrew, what's your take on the Riders?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'll be pretty short with my talk really with the Saskatchewan team. I thought they were one of those teams last year, Ian, that were struggling to kind of make their identity. I mean, they were one of those teams that's so flashy. We saw Duron Carter making these highlight plays, and all of a sudden he's playing defense as well, and back in the quarterback position, you got an INT defensive position. But you look at Zach Collaros, like you mentioned, we need to see him be a little more mobile, I think, a little more agile, escape the pocket. A lot of people in the chat asking what the differences in the CFL as far as running back go, quarterback go. You need to. It's a very huge field. It's a very, very long field. You need to see quarterbacks be able to get out of that pocket and make plays. I mean, some guys like Levi Mitchell can just stand there and rocket launch passes. I do understand that, but Collaros has to come in here and make an immediate impact. You look at what what they really did last year, and the guys that they had in with Brandon Bridge and Kevin Glenn. Now Kevin Glenn being a backup, but I think this is Zach Collaros' turn really to kind of take over this team. But as far as how tough that West Division is, and I think the up and coming East Division, I think this team is going to be kind of on a lull this year, actually. So I'm going to look under at the plus money of 8.5, plus 110, under 8.5 wins for the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Yeah. I mean, this is the team in the West that I have the most concern about. Let's put it that way. I think there's potential for Saskatchewan, but I have the most concern about them than any other team in the West. Moving on, I don't have much concerns about these. This team in particular. I like Edmonton Eskimos a lot. They're our next team we're talking about. This is Mike Riley, who is a quarterback that has been consistent. He's actually been able to stay healthy for the most part. Last year was a big season for him. Edmonton last year on the campaign. Let me see what their record was. It was a very good record last year. As I've here we go. 12-6 straight up. We found it. 12-6 straight up. Only 7-9-1 against the spread last year. This Edmonton team. So from a point spread standpoint, they weren't great. They started out red hot. They went into a swoon, and then they got hot again late in the season, and then they ended up getting into the playoffs. It was like a tale of 3 different seasons in one for this Edmonton team. But there's a lot to like here. I mean, there really was. I mean, you look at this Eskimos team. Wide receivers, they're going to be great. Defensively, there's a lot to like as well with this group. Lots of weapons as far as I'm concerned. Very good at football team. And you talk about a difference maker of a addition to this team midway through the season last year. That was C.J. Gable. When C.J. Gable came on board as a running back, it was the totally different offense. Could throw the ball to him. He could catch it. Could hand it off, be the bell cow running back for this team, take pressure off Riley. Big time for this team. They're very well balanced. They can play pretty good defense. They've got a good offense. I think they're right there with Calgary and Winnipeg. I like it those 3 teams especially. And there's also a dark horse I think is going to be improved this year that we'll get to in the West. But Edmonton, yeah, lots to like. Probably will be an over team because that's an offense that's balanced and tough to stop. Andrew, what do you like with Edmonton here?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Edmonton this year coming in, like you mentioned, the CJ Gable. What a guy on a nightly basis. He can come out. He can make plays from the receiving end. He can also go out for some huge runs that will really change a game, change a quarter. And one thing interesting about this team, though, it's notable to mention, this Edmonton team went 8-9-1 ATS against the spread last year. So this is one of those teams that, as far as money line perspective and from a team betting perspective, as far as standings, they know how to win. I mean, they went 12-6 on the season. They find a way to win. But if you look at it, they had 28 points average per game, 27 average against. So I mean, it's kind of rough to look at that and say, look, this is the team I want to bet against the spread quite often. But also Brandon Zylstra, excellent wide receiver with them last year, signing with the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL. That's huge news for them, losing him. So watch out for Darrell Walker. He'll be stepping into that huge role this year. And I think, again, the biggest thing with this team will be their defense. Can they get stops? Can they get stops in the first half and not make Mike Riley come out and put up 20, 25 points in the second half? If they can do that, they will be a very successful team.
All right, next up, Calgary Stampeders, 13-4 straight up, 9-8-1 against the spread last year. Look, they've been ruling this West Division for years. I don't know if it's going to be as easy for them this year. Levi Mitchell, arguably he is one of the best quarterbacks, might be the best quarterback in the CFL. Lost in the Grey Cup last year to Toronto. There's that hunger factor to avenge that loss, but there's a lot of pieces around him that have left. Defensively, offensively, the wide receiving core is going to look a little bit different this year. It was an aging defense that's going to be revamped a little bit this season. This may be a tougher challenge for Dave Dickenson to maintain that same high level for Calgary. And Calgary, one thing they've been is a dominant point spread team with all these great years. Their point spread record fell last year to 9-8-1 against the spread. It wouldn't surprise me to see Calgary have a losing point spread mark this season because they're still going to be heavily priced and well respected, and I don't think they're going to be quite as good this year. Still in the mix in the West, but I think this could be the year where we actually see a little bit of a drop with Calgary. Andrew, what's your thoughts on the Stamps?
Yeah, almost the exact same thoughts as you, Ian. I mean, this is a team that's absolutely dominated against the spread. One thing that's interesting, and that's why I love our weekly shows and different stuff, talking with you, Ian, how we can bounce ideas back together. we kind of noticed that the Calgary Stampeders had a little bit they didn't really have to try as hard and had as less effort because they kind of locked down that Western position, that Western number one seed. And I think heading into this season, they know there's a little more competition out there, even in the East as well. So things aren't going to be as easy for them. And I don't think we're going to get as big of spreads on them. But again, Bo Levi Mitchell, one of, if not the best, next to Mike Riley in my eyes, as the best quarterback in the CFL. One thing about this Calgary team, there's just so many weapons in the wide receiver position. Notable to mention, we've got Messam, of course, in the running back position, but Roy Finch arrested this past summer. He's placed on retired position right now. So I thought that Finch was actually a huge player. He kind of stepped things up and took the pressure off Messam. So we'll see Jerome Messam hopefully have a huge season to start, but it's nice to have that secondary and third option at running back position. But as far as this Calgary teams go, they will be at the top of that West Division once more this year. Just matter if it'll be second or first in my eyes.
All right, so BC Lions, very quickly, we've only got a couple minutes left. BC Lions last year, 7-11 straight up, 6-10-1 against the spread. A massive disappointment in my eyes, but I think the arrow might be pointing up. You talk about drop dead bargain basement value team in the West. BC could be it. Wally Buono's final season. Jonathon Jennings, not a very good year by his standpoint, but it's put up or shut up time for this man who I believe has still got talent. Dual threat, can run, can throw. I think he'll be better because he's got Jovan Olafioye. What a huge addition to that offensive line for BC. A premier offensive lineman to help that bad BC offensive line from last year. You've got Odell Willis coming over. Gabriel Napton coming over to bolster that pass rush. You've got a secondary that's going to have some changes, but that secondary was no good last year. So who the hell cares? Yeah, you got to put new faces in there. I don't make a big deal of that. They had to change the secondary. It wasn't good. I don't mind that they've got new players there this year. They've got all the receivers you could hope for. Arsenault, Brian Burnham, Kevin Elliott. I mean, you've got targets. I think he'll be better. Everyone's excited. They want to send Wally Buono out on a strong final season. This is his last year as the head coach. He's very well liked. BC to me, value team heading into the season. Andrew, we got about a minute here. What do you like with BC? Do you agree?
Yeah, I fully agree. We're looking at 6.5 wins. Minus 150 is a tough price to lay, but 6.5 wins, they will reach over that in my eyes. Jonathon Jennings, you and I talked about at the beginning of the year last year what we expected out of him, and we did not get that whatsoever. This was a quarterback that if you could define inconsistency for the quarterback position, that's exactly what we saw out of him. Not to mention this defense for this BC Lions team. I mean, you got to put some numbers up and make things a little bit easier on your defense. But I think overall, this defense will get some stops. Will get in the hairs of the opposing team's quarterback. And I think overall, Jonathon Jennings and his wide receiving core will step things up. They will reach over that 6.5 wins, minus 150.
Yeah, 6.5. It's 7.5 plus 100. So if you like the plus better price, you can go 7.5. I like 6.5 or 7.5 over with BC. I like over 9.5 wins with Toronto. And quickly, futures wise, I like Winnipeg plus 550. I think they're there with a chance to win it this year. And I like BC plus 900. That's right. I'm going into that bargain. Toronto was one of the lowest future options last year. What did they do? They won the Grey Cup. BC's got that potential to be a plus 900 as a good value Grey Cup future. Quickly recap any futures and season win totals, Andrew, that you like.
All right, let's see here. We got Montreal Alouettes under 5.5 wins in the season, plus 110. Hamilton Tiger Cats over 9.5 wins, minus 125. BC Lions over 6.5, minus 150. I know that is a tough line there, but if there were to be a best bet on the show for me in this show, it would be that BC Lions over there. And also, yeah, I'm going to go with the future here on it's going to be the Edmonton Eskimos to win the Grey Cup this year. I know it's not too much of an underdog price, but I think they will be the leader in the West Division this year.
All right, there we go. Winnipeg or Edmonton, no argument with that. I almost bet that one. That was like my final cut. But yeah, no argument. Edmonton's got a chance to win it all as well. That's going to wrap up our inaugural edition of the CFL 3-Down Breakdown. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll be here every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, throughout the CFL season. For Andrew McGinnis, I'm Ian Cameron for Sportsbook Review. Enjoy the week. We'll be back next Tuesday with our next episode.